Hello everyone, welcome to JS Gigs and my name is Deepak. Up until now, we have spoken about what Cypress is all about. We have also seen the architecture and we have also started writing test cases in the last tutorial. In this tutorial, we are going to be writing a test cases, but a little more advanced one. But before I start writing test cases on this Angular application that you see on your screen, I want to take your attention to the Cypress documentation first. So there are a few URLs that one must always have when they are coding in Cypress or when they are writing the test cases in Cypress, right? So this is the Cypress documentation. What you see right now on the screen is the Cypress core concepts. So we have spoken about introduction of Cypress, and we have also spoken about the selectors and stuff like that. We have also spoken about the testing type, which is the E2E and the component. And what we are doing currently is called component testing. We have also spoken about how to organize the test cases, meaning E2E test cases are usually written under Cypress folder, which is there the root of the project, and the component folder is basically written, or the component tests are usually written along with the component that you define inside the component folders of your JavaScript application or an Angular application for that matter, right? We have not spoken about the test isolation. Okay, so what is test isolation? Test isolation essentially means that each of your test case, when it runs, it must have a clean slate to run the test cases in order to have a right result. And how would one clean the test is using some of the functions. And before I explain some of those functions, let me take you to the code editor. So here at the code editor, let me close everything first of all, and then I'll try to open the cy.ts file, which is also basically the component test file. So here is called beforeEach, right? And there are also a few other functions such as beforeAll. There is a function called afterEach. So let's say after all, after each, right? So all these functions are available. And these functions essentially use in order to create a test framework, or in order to create a context and to remove a context later on when you finish writing test cases, right? So currently we are only testing the component. So these before each and after each and all of these things would come into play and will be much more handier when we write the end-to-end test cases. But it is important for us to understand what test isolation is all about, and then we will talk about it in a great detail when we do E2E test cases. All right, so now again let me take you back to the browser, and here at the browser you notice that it also speaks about some of these functions such as aliases, clock mocks, intercept, spice, stubs, and view port changes, right? So as you can also see here, the documentation, it talks about test isolation in end-to-end test cases. That's something which we'll do towards the end of this tutorial. We are not going to be talking in detail about this, but then test isolation in component testing is something that we are going to be testing and we are going to be doing, right? And so basically when you do a test isolation in component testing, usually the cookies and local storage and session storage are the one that you must clean, and you must fill the values before writing the test case in case if your test cases involve local storage and session storage. The other type of other type of isolation is something which is very much specific to the end-to-end test cases that will come to later, but then let's just focus on the component testing for now. And I also want to talk to you about aliases, right? So, and that's something we will see in action in a moment from now. So what is aliases, right? So aliases, as in, let's say if you want to use certain variables within the scope of your test cases, these are now usually assigned as aliases, and these aliases are something that you can use in further test cases that we will see in a moment from now, right? So such as example, the example on your screen currently shows as syntax. So it is basically a function with start with .as, and then you can give the alias name, and there is also an overloading of this as function available with the options, right? So it has one method available for the alias, and an alias is something which, let's say if there is a value that you wish to later use, that's when you use alias, right? So .as is a function. Also note that .as function cannot be really chained at the CY level. It has to be followed by some other function. For an example, the correct usage of this function is given over here. Say for example, let's say you want to get some value. This is a selector. That's something which we have already seen. And then let's say if you want to find something and then you want to take first and then as first nav. And now after this line, whenever you write the first nav would be available for your other test cases to use it, right? And I just bring it down here at the DOM element. So here also you can see that there are multiple such examples given. In one of the it is mentioned as submit button, and then the same submit button would be basically used elsewhere. Otherwise you can see this particular thing, right? So there is an interceptor which is being used, and then this particular interceptor can be basically further used to chain the promises, and promises is something that which is all must be aware of. Just in case if you're not aware of the promises and any other term that I have used so far, I would request you to write down in the comment section below, and I'll try to create a separate video tutorial around it, right? But for now, I assume that you all know what promises are. And then cy.wait is basically, there's a promise chaining in case of a Cypress, and that's how you use it, right? Then fixtures are basically something that you use to read the data. Let's say if you have a static data that you wish to use, so you usually keep that under the fixture folder, and then that particular folder can be ends with .json, which is basically the nothing but data. The .json format can be used inside your function, and that can be basically given an alias just like the way it is being defined here at the line, the highlighted line, with the name of admin, and then that admin can be further used. Say for example this test case, right? So this .admin.length, it tells you that what is the length and how many records are there in this JSON file. I think that's pretty much it, and then now we are going to be talking about the other things. So let me just go back. Clock mock is again something that, let's say if you wish to explain, or let me just take you there first, right? So clock is a function, cy.clock, that overrides the native global function related to time, allowing them to be controlled synchronously via cy.tick or the yield clock object. This include controlling, right? So let's say if a browser function such as set timeout, clear timeout, set interval, clear interval, and date, if you're using this clock function, or if you are using clock function in the cy object, you can basically fasten the time in your browser. Let's say if you had written a particular piece of block wherein you in your code which you wanted to test, and that code of yours you have written a set timeout for, let's say, 3 seconds, then in test cases must not really wait for those 3 seconds to complete. Let's say if you want to put the clock, if you want to fasten the clock immediately, so what you can do is like tick function, cy.tick function, and then that particular tick function will give you move the clock. Tick function can basically fasten the clock or move the clock further in the future, and that's how you immediately test. You don't really have to wait for 3 seconds to test that particular piece or line of code, right? So here you can see that all its usage, it's given in their documentation, and I would request you to go through that and see if you have any doubts around it. Please do write down in the comment section below, and I'll try to cover that. For now, I just want to give you the overview of what these are all about. And now let me go back. So intercept is again something that we are going to be making use of in the future, or probably in the next tutorial. Spies, stubs, and viewport changes. For now, what we are going to do what we are going to be doing is basically making use of aliases, right? And then we will see how it works in real life, right? So now let me open the application that we are trying to create a test case of. So now if you look at this particular application, I've modified it a little bit for the error, such that it shows an error in case if the mandatory validations or the email validations are not fit. The username, it is the, so what I've modified this application such that the username is accepted as the email. So let's say if you write down, if you click on it and you move away, then it says that username is mandatory. The error message is being shown right underneath the field. So let's say I write the name, but if you look closely, it also tells you that email is required, meaning the username is essentially the email. So the moment you put @ and write down some of the character, the moment you give the proper email, both these errors are gone, right? So similarly, password is mandatory. Password doesn't really need any error message per se. I'm just going to be focusing on the username, and let's say if you start removing it, and the moment you remove it, again email is required. The moment you remove this, username is required, right? So this is how it is. All right, so let me refresh this. So this is the behavior we are going to be testing in our application or in our test case. So let me take you back to the code editor, and here is the code editor. You can see that cy.wizard, and I've written before each, and I've also written a component, right? So here in this particular piece of code, which is it, login component test. So let me define this Cypress mounts at the moment, right? So I just wanted to see if all these variables are available or not. In the next tutorial or in the next function, I'm going to be testing the behavior and the error message, right? So let me write it down. Let me write down the name, right? And let me say this. So let's just save this, and let me share my entire desktop. So here I'm going to be running this particular test case. So let's just start this. Okay, so now you can see that the assertion has failed. The first test pass, wherein we are basically mounting the component, and the second error message failed. And this, if you look closely here, it says that to have username is required, but the text was username is mandatory, right? So let's just change that in the code. So let me take you to the code editor, and here is the code editor. Let me share my entire desktop, and here now you can see that both of these test cases have passed. So if you see the first one, which was to mount the component, and the second one wherein I'm basically testing if the username is mandatory or not, right? So the next test case I'm going to be writing, wherein I would write the username. The behavior has to be, let's say if I type something, and then if it is not a valid email, the email is required would be shown, right? So let's just write this test case. So for that, I'll again take you back to the code editor. So here is the code editor. Let me do this. Focus, and I'm also going to be writing so I'll say email is required. I'll save this. Let me share my full desktop again, and now you can see that the application has passed the test, right? So now you can see that the email is required is written over here, right? So let me write down the full username, and once I write down the full username as a proper email, none of the error must be visible, right? So again, I'll take you back to the code editor, and here the code editor, I'm going to be writing another test case. So let me save this, come here, right? So let me correct this. So this is the one wherein I would see that since the name is properly given, the username actually is a valid email. So this the mat error must not be found in the page, right? So let's just figure this out. So how do we do this by basically using another assertion. So mat error should not exist, right? So what it is going to tell us is that, let's say if the username is properly valid, then there has to be no error, right? So also let me correct the wordings of it. So first one is to mount the test case, username field, message on the email username field. right? And now let me take you to my desktop. I'll share the entire desktop, and here on the entire desktop, now you can see that the username is properly written here. And then if you focus out, there is no error, and all the 4 test cases have passed. So here you can see that the login component test, it has 4 test cases written, and then all of them have passed, right? Now let me again take you back to the code editor, and now I'm going to be making use of before each and also assertion, right? Before each, and so now I'm going to be making use of before each, and also I'm going to be making use of alias, right? So how do I do that? So if you look closely over here, all these test cases have something in common. So what is that? So if you see that it basically tries to mount the component, right? Here also you can see that it tries to mount the component, and same goes for the other test cases. So if you find any such thing which is common for all your test cases to run, you are most welcome to put that inside the before each function. So before each function, basically what happens is that it runs before all the test cases are run. So let's say you want to run the test case, and anything that you want your Cypress to do right before every it function is called, right? You can basically very well put that in before each. So let's just save this and again take you back to the desktop, and here at the desktop you can see that all the test cases have passed. Let me refresh this as well. It takes a moment and it passes it, right? Or otherwise what we can do is, like, let me just close this and bring it up again, and let's say if I run this, and there you go, it passes all the test cases, right? So now you understand what before each is all about. Now I'm going to be making use of alias. So in order to do that, I'll again take you back to code editor, and here at the code editor, you can see that I'm essentially trying to read a value, right? And in all of these values, I am making certain things, right? So let's say first one is I'm going to be focusing on this field, and then also I do a blur, meaning I focus out from this field, right? And the other things I do, right? So how do I do that? How do I fix this? So what I can do is I can just simply copy this function and put it here and put an alias on it. So what is that? So let's say username. So once I have the username, once you read this and you make it as a username, so what you can do is you can simply come down and cy.get. You don't really have to remember all of this. So you can just remove this and put it with the @ symbol. And similarly here, right? So I can just simply remove this and again put here @ username, because you have defined the name of this particular field as username using the alias function over here, right? So you can come down and input again. I'm just going to be removing this and putting it @ username, and the same goes here. You can just simply remove this, and let's just copy this, right? And I think we are pretty much good. Now let's see if that works. So what I'm going to do is, like, just going to be sharing the entire desktop of mine. So here is, there you go. You can see that all these functions have worked. So even if I refresh it or run all the test cases pass very well. There is no problem with it. There's another point that I want to bring your attention to, which is here, right? So if you look at this particular button here on the Cypress browser, you just need to click on it. And let's say if you are confused about some of the selectors, so let's just talk about this particular image, right? So you can click on this particular function, and then you can select just like you do in normal cases when you are using the dev tools, and then you hover over a particular object on the HTML page, or you click on that HTML page and then you try to read its address, or the XPath as they used to call it in Selenium. So let's say if you click on it, it gives you the selector over here. So you can see over here. Or otherwise what you can do is, like, you can also click on this particular thing, and it tells you that what is the image. It basically gives you the entire selector. And let's say if I do this, you can select any one of it. You can see that it's a fourth child, fifth child, and sixth child, right? So all of these are available here. All these selectors are available. If you are not very sure of what are the name that you can give, you can very well make use of this particular feature over here and can select and can write test cases around it, right? So we have written the basic test cases already. Now what I'm going to do is like I'm going to be testing basically the password, and password error we have already tested. We have not really written any error message per se over here. So what I'm going to do is like I'm going to be testing the login button now, right? So in order to test the login button, again, I don't think so I need this for now. So I just close this. And again, let me take you back to the code editor. So here is the code editor, or let me write it down here in the same function, same describe function itself. So let's say here, you have up until this point, you have basically typed in the username correctly. Now I'm going to be typing in the password. The password is, I'm not really validating it against anything. Okay, so for now it is only the dummy username and password. So once you write the password, the login button must be enabled. So how would you do that? So simply copy this, put this here, and let me change the name of this test case. So the name of this particular test case is going to be login button gets enabled. So here in this particular case, what I'm going to do is like I'm going to be writing the password. So let me copy this. I'll write it down for password, and username I've already written. So I can simply write password. Basically, there's no restrictions per se. I'm just trying to write it, the username and password, so that I could read it. Or let me open the login page here. And the HTML page over here. Form control name is password. I think I'll have to make use of this word here. So we also need to basically key in the username. So let me copy this bit here and put it here. So here, if you look closely, you would notice that in the beforeEach function, I have defined the username, and at the same time I'm focusing basically on a password, right? So here, if you look at this particular function, right, what it does is that it tells the Cypress engine to move away from username, whereas last function or the last statement that gets executed at line number 11 in the beforeEach function basically brings the focus on the password. So basically this particular line would not really make sense. We will remove that once we see the error. So I've saved it. Now I'm going to be taking you to my desktop. And if you look at the desktop here, you would notice that I've already received the error. So what is that error? If you look closely, it says that can only be called on the focused element. Currently the focused element is blah 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 type password, right? So you can see that we are basically trying to focus, or we're basically trying to do a blur function on a field which is not focused, right? So that's why it is an error. So in order to solve it, again, I'll have to take you back to the code editor. So here at the code editor, all I need to do is basically just remove this particular function, because obviously it doesn't really make sense logically. So I just remove it, save it. Now again, just take you back to the browser, and there you go. Now you can see that all our functions, all our test cases are passing. Now again, let me bring your attention back to the login button. So I've written the username and I've also written the password. And what I'm going to do is like I want to see if the password, if the login button, once it is enabled, we are also able to determine it gets enabled when you key in the right username and password, right? So let's just go here in the login component, and if you look here, right, it says login form, it is disabled as long as login form is invalid. It gets enabled when the login form gets valid, right? So to select this, or to look at the right selector for this, I'll take you back to the browser. So to select this, let me select again the full desktop of mine, and here I'll make use of this particular thing. you can see that you are not really able to select the button. Even if you hover over it, nothing happens. Only when you put the right email, you're then able to select this particular button. And it only has one match, right? So let me copy this. So how do I copy this? It's simple. I'll just do this, and then again I'll go back to the code editor, and there are the code editor. I'm going to be opening this particular file. Should have text login, right? And then once I write this again, I think that we are pretty much good. It's disabled. I'll remove this and I'll write it down this way, or basically not exist. Remove this bit, right? So let's say if you key in the incorrect username, then the button must not be really visible, right? Let's see if this has worked. So again, I'll take you back to my desktop, and here the desktop, let me give it a refresh, and there you go. You can see that as soon as I have given an incorrect username, the login button was not really enabled, as a result of which it gets disabled, and then you can see that this particular test case also passed, right? So now what I'm going to do is, like, I'll take you to my browser, and there at the browser you can see that again, to the older documentation, alias, we have seen how aliases work. We have also seen how beforeEach basically works. We have also spoken about the test isolation. We have also seen some of these functions, and if you come down here, we have also seen the assertions. We have made this work. I think we are pretty much good here. So thanks a lot, ladies and gentlemen, for listening and all that while. It is an absolute pleasure to host these tutorials for you. In case if you're liking my work, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also hit the bell icon in case if I post a new video, you would be notified. In the next tutorial, I'm going to be talking about the other important and interesting stuff about Cypress, so which is intercept, spice, stubs, and viewport changes, right? So thanks a lot, ladies and gentlemen, for listening it once again, and I'm going to be seeing you in the next one.